Hello and welcome back to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. Today we are talking to one of my absolute favorite people in the world, my friend Meg Resnick. Meg is a therapist and a Reiki master teacher, and she has been integrating spiritual healing into the clinical work that she does with her clients, which I think is awesome. And we've got a lot of different things to talk about today. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for being here, Meg.
Aw, thank you for your kind words. I feel absolutely the same way. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So, one of the first things when you gave us your answers that I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And I think I had known this about you before, but you and Jonathan have something in common. You
Ah,
both experienced sleep paralysis when you were younger.
all
Yeah.
right.
So,
Yeah.
tell us a little
And
bit about that.
absolutely. And I'd be interested to know too if his idea of where the source of that might be coming from, in terms of his childhood. My first memory of that, I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And just to give you a little backstory about my childhood, I was the youngest of four kids. It was a blended family, and my parents were very hardworking, but maybe not as hands-on. It kind of the traditional you kids almost raising themselves, really
Mm,
doing their own thing. And I was probably 5 or 6, and I remember my parents they were partiers, so I kind of feel like it was probably a dinner party of some kind that had run late. They may have shooed me off to bed early because, get the kids out of your hair. And I remember laying in bed, and it's interesting because I shared a room with my sister till I was probably 9 years old. And I remember laying in bed and hearing noises coming from my dresser and looking over and recognizing that the bottom drawer was open. And I don't know at what point, but started to feel very terrified that something was in my dresser. And then the paralysis became evident at that point, just hearing noises, not being able, the typical where you're sort of talking, but nothing's coming out.
hmm
Help, help, or mom, mom, but nothing's happening. So, and just feeling like weighted in the bed,
Okay.
just like not that something was holding me down, but like my body literally was heavier than I had the muscle tone to lift.
Wow.
And so as that memory unfolds, I remember seeing little tiny beings. They were small. So I know a lot of sleep paralysis in the research I've done, because obviously I was like, wow, as an adult, this has become more interesting to me. And we have the internet now. So looking things up, but a lot of people report like sort of a black figure or, I think they're called hypnagogic, just hallucination. But for me, it was these little tiny men, and they were sort of dressed as if they were going to an opera. They were dressed in like tuxedos, but they kept jumping in and out of my bottom drawer and laughing at me, kind of in a way that was sort of making fun. So I remember feeling embarrassed and feeling like angry, but also scared and what is going on, and I can't move. So that was my first memory of it.
Wow. I can't even
Um,
imagine being that young and how terrifying that
right,
must have been.
right, exactly. Well, and you and I know this, then, the next day trying to share this with my family and
hmm
everybody just being like pat on the head, and
Yeah.
that didn't happen.
Go away, little
So
Meg. Yeah.
Meg's looking for attention.
Yeah.
So because of the way my childhood unfolded, I think that now that looking back on it, I know that had to be just a sense of overwhelm or stress in my life at that time during my waking hours. Um, but also what happened after that was just, I had probably maybe two or three more bouts of that from the age of like 5 to when I moved out when I was 17. But I was like a chronic sleepwalker. And thank God, since I've been an adult, I haven't done that, but like to the point where they had to lock the house and move things. And there were some fears that I would actually leave the house and go outside. So that was like, I've had times where my father, because he worked at GE, which was about an hour north of where I grew up in the Adirondacks, and he would have to get up at like, I'm going to say 3 o'clock in the morning to get himself ready to get on the road to report to work in Schenectady at that time or on time. And he would tell me stories that I would get up and like full out make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, have a full conversation with him, sit down, ask him about, his evening or whatever. And then I would just go back to bed and have no memory of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting. And then in my adult life, how it manifested was I would be, and obviously I'm not conscious of this. This is reports from whoever I was, my husband, whoever was in the room with me. But I would be in a bed sleeping and all of a sudden would sit bolt upright in bed, and it was always looking off to the right, which ironically is always where the door was in whatever room I was sleeping in, because I've moved a few times and it still has carried on. And I would be blankly staring as if I'm looking at something, and completely terrifying whoever was sharing that bed with me. Like, what are you doing? Why are you having this? And that was, I've been through a divorce. So that was two partners
Mm-hmm.
that reported that that's what I would do. I've also had like screaming in the middle of the night. So all of these episodes, though, I do feel like would happen during particularly stressful times or if
Okay.
there was a loss. And when it resurfaced, it was right after the death of my father. So I do
Mm-hmm.
I do want, like, there is that part of me that's like, was that a spirit? Like, was he coming to visit? And when I was looking off into the right, like that was he just standing in the doorway.
Mm-hmm.
And, but so those, I've
Yeah.
had some pretty significant sleep disturbances throughout my lifetime,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting that it's happening at times of stress, but when you were, I mean, I know it's hard to kind of put yourself back into like the 5-year-old brain, but do you feel like there was something supernatural going on there as well?
I do, in the fact that, okay, so you're stressed and overwhelmed. And, we know that sometimes that will manifest in these sort of waking type dreams. But I also feel like that is a time when you're in your most luminal space in your brain state, and you're
Mm-hmm.
going to have access to things that you don't have access to during your waking hours. So I do feel like that's kind of like a portal or a time when people are more likely to be more have more medium
Yeah.
or more ability to access spiritual beings
Yeah.
or parts of our brain that are linked to psychic ability. I do think that you're going to be more likely when you're in that in between
Yep.
state, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you had brought something else up when, you answered our questions about like children being open.
Yeah.
At 5 years old,
Oh
I
yeah,
think you are very open.
absolutely. Um, and I do think that that is something where not only are we more open, but we also are more attractive, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of we have that childlike wonder and innocence and purity of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like we're closest to our state of carnation,
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that the spirit realm is much more drawn to the light of children. Um,
I love that. That's not something I've thought about before until you just said that, but like, yeah, it's not just that they're open and they haven't been jaded or told like, no, this isn't real. It is, there's an energetic difference. You are
Yeah,
closer to spirit when you're younger. You
yeah,
haven't gone through all those wounds yet.
right.
Oh,
Absolutely.
that's interesting.
Yeah. And I think that for the most part, although sleep paralysis was scary, any
Hmm.
time that when I was younger, anytime that I was probably open and experiencing something that was of more of a paranormal or a spiritual nature, you're not as afraid. You don't have like the social norms of I should be afraid right now. That doesn't
Mm,
make sense. That shouldn't be happening. I think
yeah.
we kind of live, especially again, if you knew my childhood, I think I really spent a lot of time in play, make believe, fantasy because I didn't have a lot of structure to my I didn't have a lot of structure to my routines and I obviously went to school, but I think I had a lot of alone time,
Hmm.
which would just allow my imagination and my energy to go wherever it wanted,
Yeah,
you know.
makes sense. Jonathan, I don't know, has any of your experiences, did you ever actually like see anything or was it more of just like paralyzed, can't move?
Well, so for me, and so a lot of people who deal with the sleep paralysis thing report the sounds of either people going through their belongings or like there's people who feel like they hear like their furniture being moved, even like heavy furniture, like somebody moving your house around. And then whenever it's over, everything's normal. But a lot of times people are either afraid to open their eyes or don't have the power to open their eyes. So they really can't speak to whether anything is happening in that arena. A lot of people have this visual of like someone sitting on their chest. That's something I never had to deal with, fortunately. The What's interesting to me, I think, for this is there was one time, and this wasn't really a sleep paralysis issue. This was I was laying there, kind of on that verge of between asleep and awake, really. Um, and I was laying on my side, looking off the bed onto the floor beside me, kind of like half on, half off, and I saw on the floor going from the bottom of my vision to the top of my vision, like from the bottom of the bed to the top of the bed, like parallel. These They look like miniature humans, and they were walking from the bottom of my vision to the top of my vision, and there were five or six people dressed like stereotypical TV cowboys, kind of. And there was a wagon and like a horse that was pulling it, and it just went across my vision. The main difference between what you just said and what I just said is that I was 22 when this happened. This is not when I was a little kid. I was an adult. I was a college graduate at that point. Um,
Oh,
and it's one of those things where like it happened, and they were like I could hear them walking. I could hear like noises, and it happened and it stopped and it started and they left my range of vision, and I looked up, a look around, and at this point I I was living with someone, I had a partner, and this was not a person that you could talk about this kind of stuff with. They would have told me I was either full of shit or losing my mind. So I looked around, I was like, well, there's literally no one I'm ever gonna be able to tell this to. So I turned around on my other side and went to sleep. I'm like, well, that's the thing that's happened to me now.
Now
so
you get to talk about it.
Jonathan, now I have a question. I wonder because you also, this carried into your adult life. Did you ever have a sort of, it's almost like, I want to say out of body, but where you're sleeping or you're in that space that in between awake and asleep where you actually were floating and looking down, like where you could see yourself?
Yeah, when I was like, I want to say 12 or 13. Um, my mom was like interested in a bunch of, strange stuff too. And when I was 12 or 13, I'd had a conversation with my mom, and she had said when she was a teenager, her and her older brother had learned a bunch about astral projection and had done it a lot and had just kind of fallen out of it.
Yeah.
And she explained the method she had used when she was younger to do that. And I was curious, and I believed her, but I was like, that's, you don't really hear people talking about that. At least, in the early 90s in the South, you didn't. And so I was like, well, I was laying in bed one night because I've always been an insomniac. I've always, lived off between 3 and 5 hours of sleep a night since I was like 9. And so I was like, well, I'm going to try this. And I tried it and it worked. And then I overthought it. I kind of fixated on this idea of what would happen to someone if they did that and couldn't fit back in their body
Okay.
correctly.
Yeah.
And so I never did it again after that purposefully.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, when they're teens and even into their early adult lives, will report that they have these moments when they wake up and they feel like they're falling into their bed.
Mm,
And I think that for some people that is the end of a dream, and I think maybe for some people that is them putting themselves back into their body.
yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting. Yeah. And I have had those experiences and different than I mean, it's kind of like sleep paralysis because you're looking at your body and it's obviously not moving, but it
mhm.
looks like I'm in full asleep, but just looking down. And I have that I do believe might be something like projection or
Mhm.
kind of, when you're asleep, your brain is healing and kind of compartmentalizing the data that it's gotten, but also I do feel like where does your spirit go though? So
Mhm.
it does make sense to me that maybe you would be able to expand your reality and just project into something else. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I've definitely had that experience of feeling like you're falling into your bed, like waking up. And one time I remember in third grade, it's the only time I feel like I can remember astrally projecting, but I had to do like a presentation like in third grade, and I was so scared and I was so nervous. And I remember at some point I was watching myself. Like I wasn't like my body, my mouth was talking,
Now,
but I was literally like over me, watching me do it. And I was, and at third grade, I don't even know how old you are then, but little. I didn't know what to make of it other than like, that was really weird. What just happened to
well,
me?
very, very protective.
Yeah, for
You were
sure.
tucked away safe outside of your body.
Yeah.
You just checked out. Let whatever instincts, let that primal instinct take over.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
The other thing that I find interesting about both of your stories of the little people,
No, when he said that, I was like, it wasn't just me.
it wasn't just you. That's very strange. But last night we watched Supernatural and it was about little fae people. Yeah. And then he was listening, like he's listening to a podcast that was about like the fae and UFOs, which is like exactly what that episode was about. And I'm like, that's just interesting synchronicities.
Oh, no, that definitely is very cool. Yeah, I just remember because in that with my adult research, I never read anybody else's story that like Jonathan's that included miniature humans
Hmm.
or possibly fae or some kind of little
Something.
being. It's just a little
Yeah.
being. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Oh, they're definitely out there. There definitely are modern people who are doing research about fairies, for example. Like there's this guy, just Josh Cutchins, he did like a book about Bigfoot not being necessarily like a flesh and blood thing. He did a book about fairies. He's done a bunch of stuff. There's quite a few people out there. You just have to know where to look for stuff anymore, really.
Mhm.
But it is a subculture that has got a lot to it these days. Um, interesting to kind of to go back to the whole hypnagogic state thing. There's been a lot of people over the past, I would say, 150 years who have done a lot in looking at that first 30 minutes after you wake up, the last 30 minutes before you go to sleep. Like Emile Coué was one of the first power positive thinking people. He had this mantra that he had people say that is like kind of a cliche at this point. It starts out like every day and every way I'm getting better and better. And he would say to say that 20 times right before you go to sleep and 20 times right when you wake up, because basically that's the best time to hypnotize yourself,
Yeah.
because we are machines and we are programmable. And so that is the best time to program yourself, is when you are in that, kind of semi-suggestible state.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think there's even research saying that the chemistry in our brains is more receptive, whether it is to something, from a different dimension or it is from, manifesting our own realities. So there's actual DNA and chemistry that's
Hmm.
happening. We're in that state.
Yep.
How late into life did you experience the sleep paralysis thing?
So I feel like that morphed into um sleepwalking probably by the time I was 10. I might have had maybe a half a dozen more episodes of it before I was 10. And it started to feel, this is going to sound weird, but I almost feel like I was having deja vu when it was happening in my sleep. Like, oh, yeah, this is happening again. So it was almost as if the childlike wonder had started to abate. It
Hmm.
wasn't, it wasn't like kind of pulling me in or charming me anymore, or even creating mystery. It was almost more of like this is boring, this is old, and I can't help but wonder if my psyche was like, all right, well, we're gonna make this more interesting. You're going on an adventure now. So taking away the paralysis and doing the polar opposite,
Hmm.
throwing my body into movement, and but I'm not there, have
Yeah.
no memory of that. So that really came based on reports from my mom and my dad and my siblings of, oh, like where the whole house would end up awake sometimes. Like there she goes. She's off and running. Um, but and that really honestly, I think I probably clustered depending on what was going on in my life. So if I was stressed out or if a family member passed away or, like Brittany said, a big project coming up and I got to speak publicly in my classroom, something
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
would, evoke a teenage brain to fry.
Yeah. I just think about it in terms of like parts, because we
Yeah.
do parts work, right, for
Yeah.
therapy. And it's like it seems like there was a part that was taking over during sleep for some reason.
Totally. Yeah. And maybe was so hyper suppressed during waking hours that
Hmm.
was, going to take that advantage of that time that
Yep.
they couldn't keep it down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. The rest
Yeah.
of her is asleep. Now it's our
Yep.
time to play and
Yep.
do things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I think the only thing I would add is, that with that, also that looking down on your body, that there were a lot of commonalities now that I've done the research on the internet of like a near death experience,
Hmm. Hmm.
people can see a team of people working on them. I find that fascinating. I feel like that's to be continued in terms of how I what I learn about that or glean from that or any theories I might be able to hatch, It's an interesting time when your psyche and your brain is in a different state for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you live in a pretty interesting house and
Yeah.
next door to an interesting house with an
Yeah.
interesting history. So
Yeah.
tell us about those homes and experiences you've had in them.
Absolutely. So I shared that I'm with my second husband, so who I do feel is my soulmate, and was very lucky to have met him um, probably in the early 2000s. So his family kind of, I want to say, were the sort of the founding family of the little hamlet we live in. And it's, kind of just an intersection, just like Norman Rockwell type place. There's a church and a post office, which ironically, the post office is run out of the family home. And both of these buildings sit next to each other on a shared parcel. And they were really the hub of this little community. And I want to say they were built probably in the early or the late 1700s or early 1800s. I think they're a couple hundred years old anyway. And 8 generations of people have been here. And within the post office, which is attached to an old country store, which is also attached to a beautiful old Victorian home, a lot of activity happened there in those 8 generations. And the family has always run that post office. And next door, so this is the house or structure I actually live in, was the funeral home. And so, and I think Brittany remembers, they actually had like a horse-drawn hearse, and there was a Percheron stable in the bottom of our house. And it was definitely a probably a busy place, but not as festive and lively as the house next door. So people have always asked me, and I've always prided myself of when I share the story of this old funeral home, I always have made the clarification, but it's not haunted. But the place next door has a lot of activity, all, feeling very positive, benevolent, but there's been a lot of activity over there. And I'll come back to some changes in terms of my feeling about whether or not this house is haunted or not. But I'll start with the stories next door. Have so David's parents, they winter, they're snowbirds, so they go somewhere sunny in the wintertime, which has kind of left us the caretakers of this building, this structure next door, this house. And we my husband has gotten to the point where he will not go over there by himself if it's dark,
Mhm.
because sometimes we have to go over there and check a sump pump, or we've gone over there to water flowers or plants that might be sort of kept in a warm room where they still have heat in the bathroom. Um, and he has heard footfalls. He has heard children laughing, sort of like the typical, and just that feeling of being watched. So we've also enjoyed, because it's such an old Victorian, and they have kept it very period correct in terms of like making sure everything, if they renew something, that they're putting it back the way it was. So it definitely looks old. But we go over there for Christmas because it's cute, charming, kind of neat little Victorian Christmas. So we would go over there Christmas morning. And oftentimes we'd also go back over there for dinner on Christmas Day, sort of taking a break in between. And there's an old chair, I'm sure you can picture it in your mind's eye, of like, it has a mirror, it's very tall, so it has a seat, and it has hooks on it where you might put a hat or a scarf or whatever. And on this old throne, I want to call it, they had a top hat silk top hat and a walking cane, the brass tipped with the lion's head on it. And they were on opposite sides, one being higher than the other. So the top hat was on the right and the walking cane was on the left. And that's the way it's always been. I mean, to the point where it's a little dusty and you can tell, if that it's been sitting there for a while. And we had our Christmas morning, opened gifts, a little coffee, blah, blah, blah. Everybody left to break to go back to their respective homes to kind of just lounge and nap. And then we were going to head back for dinner, Christmas dinner. And when we went back for Christmas dinner, I heard my husband say, Dad, did you move the top hat? And his father was like, no, what are you talking? And everybody just froze and switched. So now the cane is in the upper right-hand corner, the top hat is in the lower left, and everybody is trying to call each other's bluff. Like, who did that? And you could even see where the dust had been, reshifted and kind of disturbed. And to this day, we have no idea how that happened. And I think his father did before we left that night. He righted it and put it back to the way he wanted it to see if it happened again. It hasn't, but that was an interesting thing. And we've always felt like the activity does get a little more spicy when it's a holiday, when they know that we're going to be over there. So, and I've talked to my mother-in-law who grew up in that house and, kind of asked her what she, thinks of that. And she's like, I'm never alone, but I'm never afraid. Like these are my ancestors,
Gotcha.
So another time we were having a Friendsgiving. So I was heading over to a friend's house and had forgotten that we also that morning had made an appointment to have our stove replaced. So in the funeral home where I live, I had no stove and I had to make a pie. So, we're kind of panicking a little bit. And David said, wait, go over. We call it Aunt Mid's because that was the name of the woman who lived there for years and years and years. Spinster, like just wonderful woman, very intelligent woman, smoked a pipe. But she kind of was the one that stayed in that house as David grew up in this one, the funeral home. And he goes, hey, go over to Aunt Mid's. She's got an oven. She's got all the things you need over there. Like, go over there. And she has since passed, but we still call it Aunt Mid's. So I'm like, oh, you're right. So I got my ingredients and shuffled on over next door and was like, shoot, because he was helping the oven. So I couldn't help him or he couldn't help me to find what I needed though. And I had never cooked in this kitchen before. And I needed a rolling pin. I needed a pie plate. I needed a saucepan because it was to cook the filling. And all of a sudden I just said, all right, guys, you got to help me out. And I said, I need a rolling pin. And the next thing I did to open up this cupboard and there it is.
Wow.
Hey, I need a saucepan, which wasn't even in a cupboard. It ended up out on the porch, but I felt guided to walk out on this little extra pantry they had on the porch. There's a saucepan. I need a whisk. And I mean, it happened the whole time to the point where by the time I was done mixing up this pie, I was like singing to them. I was like, you guys are awesome. But they totally guided me through that. And I did get this feeling of elation from them. Like they were just so happy you're using the house the way it was intended to be used. And, just a feeling of pure love. Like, oh, we like her. She's one of us now. It was really, really a happy time, a happy memory.
Oh, I love that story. That's one of the best ghost stories I've ever heard.
Well, and I still thank them every time I go in that house. I thank
Yeah.
them for always guiding us and looking out for us over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like everybody in the family is kind of aware.
Oh,
Like, yeah, nobody's like, no. Yeah, they're aware that this is, there's spirits there. There's energy there.
absolutely.
Any clue as to like the children that David heard laughing, any clue as to who those that could be? Or
That's a great question. So within that 8 generations, and we had to do a presentation for the Historical Society of, this area. I guess Scribo it would be called, but one of the things I gleaned from that is that there were children that passed. I can't help but notice, and I need to bring this to your attention,
yeah.
is torrential at my house
Oh,
now. Like, I don't think I've heard rain like this in a long time. So I don't know about the symbolism of that, but anyway. So yeah, so there were children that passed, that got sick and passed. There were also a lot of husbands. I think there was a doctor that sort of met an untimely death. There actually is Civil War documents over there. So I feel
oh,
like that within the realm of visual, I think that there's probably been an apparition of people who are dressed in uniform. So I don't know specifically whose child that was,
hmm.
but I did hear about there being illness in that house and within that family. And I think that there were 1 or 2 children who have passed before they, untimely, before they got to live their life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I'd like to research it more. Maybe to be continued. Maybe I'll come back after I get
Yeah.
it, do some genealogy over there.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
8 generations, that is just wild,
Yeah. Very. And I haven't shared this with you, but or maybe I have. It's incredible the amount of like artifacts that are over there, but there is one whole room that is completely nothing but dolls.
Oh.
Yeah. And so you walk in and they're the ones with like the blinky eyes and the
Uh-huh.
porcelain. There's one that like even way back in the 40s where they started to have dolls that walk. So, I mean, it's in little doll clothes and it's unbelievable. You walk in and you're just instantly creeped out if that kind
Yeah.
of bothers you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's
Oh,
definitely been children in that house.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I mean, the house itself has so many memories and so many experiences, but just the artifacts and the dolls and the antiques that are there, I'm
right.
sure that carries a lot of energy as well.
Absolutely. And to wrap, kind of put closure to what I was alluding to. So I've always been really happy that there's not paranormal activity here. And for years and years and years have never experienced anything. Um, Interestingly, to go back to the comment of children they attract or they're more open. Since Delilah has spent so much time, that's my new grandbaby, has spent so much time in this house, I've started seeing things.
Hmm.
And so is she. So, I mean, I think you know the layout of my house. There's sort of a formal dining room, and you can see that room from the living room. So Delilah and I will be playing, and all of a sudden Delilah's waving and talking to somebody in the formal dining room. I've seen shadows in the room that I do my telehealth, because there's a pocket door. Sometimes I'll leave it ajar for my kitty, and all of a sudden I'll see a shadow walk back and forth, and it's like there's nobody in that room. So noises, we've heard footfalls here where David and I both look and we're like, okay, the dog's next to Dave, the cat's on my lap. You hear that? And, of course, we're both like, yep, that definitely was something going on upstairs, to the point where he'll go upstairs to find nothing. So I think that they are probably feeling a new reborn life in this house since we've started having babies in my
Mhm.
family. So,
No.
yeah, so that's been kind of interesting.
Well, and your energy shifting too, you're opening more up to your spirituality and stuff like that. So it's like, you kind of got two things going on where the
Yeah,
energy's changed, and that might be very attractive to some spirits.
absolutely. And yeah, we talked about the childlike wonder of spirituality. I think that that probably is helping me to be more open too.
Hmm.
Possibly they've been here all along. Who
Yeah.
knows? I just
Yeah.
was so busy with my mundane life, not noticing that there's some energy here. Yeah. So good point. Yeah.
Very cool.
Never a dull moment.
No. Does it feel okay though? Like it doesn't feel, yeah.
Totally, totally feels fine. I don't think I've had any malignant feeling about the energy here. But I definitely do my protection. I've got my Hexenspiegels and
Yes.
I do my things with mirrors and stuff to just make sure that I'm not accidentally inviting something in.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like your mirror work and
Yeah,
Hexenspiegels? Yeah.
absolutely. So I won't share exactly what was going on, but I felt like I needed protection just so that I protect the innocent in case they are innocent. But I started to just really have, and I know you're an empath as well, just sort of absorbing this heavy, heavy feeling from being around certain, people or certain situations and just kind of within my spirituality was like, I bet there's a spell for that, or I bet there's like a protection amulet that you could have that would help you to not, obviously we never want to send bad energy out, but just to keep me protected and safe. And I know you do Reiki and we trained together for that. That was awesome. So like some of that kind of helped me to understand there isn't bad energy, we're just sort of vibrating at different frequencies, but I wanted to find something that would give me some equilibrium in that and help me ground if I needed to. And I ended up researching a little bit and stumbled onto mirror magic. And one of the things that they talked about was Hexenspiegels, which I think is a German word. I don't know the exact origin or terminology, like what it translates to. But what it meant to me in that reading was just that even back in the like 1800s, women would wear hat pins with mirrors on them and men with their pocket watches. That what they were really doing, it was kind of a return to sender. So if energy is coming at you that doesn't feel good or it's a little heavy for your vibration, it literally would just send it back to the person who might be unintentionally or intentionally hexing you. So I started to kind of use that. So when you come in my house, you'll see charmed mirrors, whether it's with Reiki or I might have, done some incense and tried to really seal that magic into a mirror and it'll be reversed. So it's actually pointing out at the outside of my house and I also started making Hexen Spiegel charms so that if somebody came to me and said they weren't feeling well or that they're having a hard time with a family member, just to kind of give them that strength and that and to help them do a visual of I'm bouncing that energy back to them. I'm not receiving that. And
Hmm.
so that reflection would be important to them. So yeah. And they kind of look cool too. So
They
people
do
always
look
ask,
very cool.
what is that? What's that?
Yeah.
Sounds so goth. What is that? Yeah.
So goth. No, I love it. No, you've done some beautiful work, and I think it's
You.
really cool concept. And I mean, you know, in different like energy classes I've taken, people have talked about like imagining you have a mirror around your
Yeah.
aura, but this is like a physical one that I just love that. I love that it's tangible. You can program it, with your intentions and your energy. I think that's very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the world we live in now, a little protection cannot hurt us.
Yep. Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you like it.
I do very much.
Yeah, so like that actually is just it's just a compound word from German. Spiegel is just mirror. It's just mirror. So Hexenspiegel
Okay.
is witch's mirror, basically, or witch
Okay.
mirror. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for doing your research. Awesome.
He's good like that.
He's a wealth. I love
Yeah,
that.
doing the Googles. I love it. So I know another thing that we wanted to talk about today was your experiences with signs. So
Yes.
tell us some about those experiences.
Well, I would say, I mean, you know this, I've lost a lot of family members kind of prematurely, and so I think in retrospect, what led me to my spirituality is I kept feeling like these signs are coming and coming, angel numbers, 1111, and feathers and things where I would be thinking of something and then the sign would come and I'm like, okay, so I would start to make connections to this is a sign for my lost loved one. And so my my brother, so my dad passed away, but then my brother unknowingly had the same heart condition that my father had and died a year younger than my dad did. So my dad was 59, he was 58. So that's, it's sad, but his birthday was on April Fool's Day. And he April Fool's Day one year, I looked outside and it was snowing, which in our neck of the woods in New York State, that's not necessarily rare. It's very depressing when you're starting to gear up for spring. But I looked outside and there was a cardinal on the banister of my deck. So sliding glass doors, and then maybe 3.5 feet away, there is this cardinal. And I went outside and it didn't move. It just stayed in the snow. And then I put my hand out and I actually was able to pet this cardinal.
Wow.
And I have video of it if you want to put it on your website. So I'm
Yeah.
actually petting this cardinal and I'm sobbing, I'm crying because I'm just so in awe. Like, how can this be happening? And I know people have beautiful stories of cardinals.
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't get it. Like, what? It was on my brother's birthday and he died a month later. And I am fully convinced that that was my dad coming to say, hey, reach out to your brother. It's his
Hmm.
birthday. Make sure that you have an opportunity to have that last text, that last interaction.
Hmm.
But that was really special to just like the cardinal did not move. It was just like wanted me
Yeah.
to interact with it. So
Wow.
that was a big one. So I was like, okay, duly noted, well played. Like that was pretty interesting. And since then, I feel like I've opened up more to them. And I think that's when you're going to see signs. And some
Hmm.
people might say, well, you're kind of willing that to happen. But I do feel like it's more that you are more sensitive to those. So I know I had a beautiful big Bernese mountain dog, big goofy dog that ironically was named after the Percheron that used to take space up in our basement before he was born. And he passed away I'm gonna say on a Sunday morning. His hips gave out and he was 10 years old. Berners don't live, I always say it's quality, it's not quantity with these big dogs. And we were all just heartbroken, but we sent him off beautifully. It was like he just went to sleep, and it was, the whole family was here. It was great. But I woke up that Monday morning, kind of coming down to the kitchen and looked out my window and saw in the hedgerow a perfect silhouette to the point where I thought it was him.
Wow.
And it had just snowed a little bit
Hmm.
that morning, so it hit though that hedgerow just perfectly that it looked exactly like his markings, his blaze, his
Oh.
size, because he was a big bear. And I was like, okay, that's him just saying, I'm okay, mom. I'm in the
Mhm.
snow because he loved the snow. He was a snow dog. So that like things like that came up. I also saw a rainbow after we had another loss, a young gentleman that took his life. Actually, I was on my way to an event, a work event. I had seen you. I was on my way to you that night down
Mhm.
in Syracuse, and we had ended up like a fundraiser. We were doing something to celebrate the agency we worked at, and I had saw a rainbow that night. Like, okay, this is that okay, and another big one. This was just kind of funny. I had taken my daughter, her new roommate from Albany, and my sister who lived in Saratoga met us in Albany, and I had scooped all them up and went to Salem. And I try to do a pilgrimage to Salem every year. I just love Salem. And I- on the way, we had all shared stories about signs, and one of them was ladybugs, because every time I see ladybugs, I guess it was like one of my first words. So my grandmother loved ladybugs, and my mom, and it was just kind of like part of their relationship to me. So now when I see a ladybug, I think of them. And we get to Salem, and I think we were having tacos, and we were going to go have a group seance, which was with a medium. And we all were like, we need to come up with some kind of like keyword so we know if she's legit. And ladybugs, like we were talking about them for an hour in the car. Well, that'll be our keyword. And sure enough, we're sitting in the seance, and she's giving us our reading, and she was good. I mean, there was definitely a lot of what she was saying that was legit. And all of a sudden she stopped mid-sentence and looked at all of us and went, "Why am I getting ladybugs?" We all just were like, "Oh my God," a bunch of women screaming and then saying, "Oh my God, oh my God." Like, so that was, I feel like I was surprised and pleasantly, happy about it, but I feel like it was more the rest of them that were like, "Oh my God, this is real."
Yeah.
I didn't expect that. So the following year, I took another friend, and I had called because I wanted to see if we could get the same psychic, the same medium. And I had called and left a voicemail for one of the shops down there to see if I could get in for a reading with this person, with my friend. And I never heard back, and it wasn't a big deal. And we had a blast. We were in Salem. It was fine. We had a really good trip because I usually try to go that period of time after Thanksgiving. Well, then this year, my daughter got married that weekend, so I didn't make my pilgrimage. And I looked at my phone, and I had missed a call from Salem. It's like, that's weird. So I listened to the voicemail, and it was actually from the message I had left the previous year. And she was calling as if I just called the other day and said, "Yeah, we can do a reading." And I'm like, "Shoot, I can't go." But I'm like, Salem's literally calling me now to come visit. I just thought that like it was a full year.
Yeah, that's wild.
Amazing. And I can't wait to go and find, and her name was Meg,
Aw,
which was like another irony. So I'm like, okay, I guess I gotta go to Salem.
you sure do.
Oh
Let us
yeah,
know because we'll go with you.
I would love that.
Want to
Yeah.
go to school again.
And we have gone before
We
together.
have.
It would be
Yep.
fun to bring Jonathan, and we
Yeah.
would go again. Yeah.
Love Salem. It's just
Yeah.
such an awesome city. I mean, tragic history, but they have taken tragedy and they have transformed it into something very positive and very honoring of, witches and
Absolutely.
magic and yeah.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I was just watching TikTok the other day, and there was a video on, or one of the TikToks, it was Lori Cabot, who is the
Mhm.
honorary witch of Salem. And I'm like, okay, there's another sign.
Yeah.
Nudge, nudge.
Time to go.
Yeah, time to get down there. Yeah.
So a lot of your signs, it feels like it's messages from people who have passed on, or just kind of, letting you know like they're there, they're with you. Do
Yeah.
you ever see signs that are like about your path, or about like things that, I mean, I guess Salem, that call from Salem was
Yeah, it was.
get going.
I do, and I know you know this about me. I I tend to, it's not even a skeptic thing. I think I feel that I'm a newbie spiritually. So I feel, like just to be vulnerable with that, like I do feel doubt about how to interpret signs. I am getting better, but I do feel like for me, it's more a feeling of dread when I'm having a sign that's like, don't go. And then I feel reassured when I don't go, or whatever
Hmm.
it is. Like, and I know most humans have had the experience where we leave our house, we get a mile down the road, crap, I forgot that bag, or that I was going to return something, or I need this for work, or even my phone. I've
Hmm.
done that. And I spin it around, go back. I'm upset with myself. Like, why did I do, like, I'm gonna be late now. This isn't good. And then I get down the road again or near a highway and see a horrible pile up, or
Hmm.
some tragedy that happened, or the road's blocked off because somebody wrapped around a tree, So it's like, oh, that's why that happened. So I've
Hmm.
learned to not get that feeling of like, oh, why did I do that? I don't self-deprecate anymore when I'm late. Like I'm like, that it just was meant to be. And
Yep.
I do feel like that is our spirit guides trying to give you a little bit of support so that you don't run into something awful. So I am getting better at accepting that this might be a path. This might be something to try to guide me into something better, or help me stay clear of something that's not meant for me.
Hmm.
But I'm still a newbie.
Hmm.
So I'm like, and I get so distracted. I'm like a
Yeah.
little kid.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and sometimes it's like, is this a sign, or is this just,
Right,
it's just random that this
right.
happened? But do you ever ask for signs?
I do. I mean, I think because you've helped me a little bit with some of the Akashic realm. So I do try to at least weekly ask for help with something, or some guidance, in terms of our spirit team. Um, and and I get them.
Hmm.
I think at one point I had to get rid of a dresser, and the dresser was from my mom's house, and I was feeling guilt. I was having this weird like feeling of guilt about it. Like, I don't want the dresser. It's starting to fall apart, but it's part of the family. Like how can I get rid of that?
Hmm.
And we were literally carrying it to the truck and loading it, and down comes this beautiful white feather floating down and lands right on the dresser. And there's no white birds here. Like we don't
Yeah.
have seagulls. Those are at least a mile down the road where the lake is. Like we just don't have that color of a bird. This beautiful white feather just lands right on the dresser. And I was like, okay, mom, thanks for letting me do what I got to do with this dresser, and like kind of letting me know it's okay. Get rid of it.
Hmm.
You don't need that. So
Yeah.
I do think it's important to live your life looking for signs, and to kind of stay in that openness if you can.
Hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely I've been recently asking for a lot of signs of like, if this is aligned for me, I'm gonna see, like my most recent one was like a pineapple, right?
Yes.
Like just it's like the first thing that pops into my head. It's random, not something that I would necessarily see like every day, and then it's like when you see it, it's like, like there's like that,
Yeah,
I don't know, for me, there's this gut reaction of like, oh, there it is. That's the sign I just asked for.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I do love that. And I think in my sort of amateur mind, there's been a lot of surprising signs, but they're so blatant.
Hmm.
But I want to get better at actually asking, like, if this is in alignment for me, just like you said,
Hmm.
send me this symbol or help me to see this, and I always find it interesting retrospectively that, like, okay, I knew I was going to see a deer. I didn't expect to see it on a label, but that's also
Yeah.
a sign. Like, you think it's going to be in the physical
Yeah.
form of, like, it's in the woods, and well,
Yep.
I'm not going to be in the woods and then all of a sudden you see a deer
Yep.
on a beautiful painting. You're like, oh,
Yep.
that's what that was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Jonathan, you read an interesting book about synchronicities. Can you talk about that at all?
So there is this guy. His name was Robert Anton Wilson, and he wrote a bunch of stuff. He was a futurist. He was into. He was friends with Timothy Leary. He was. There's a lot of things. But he wrote a book called Cosmic Trigger. There's actually three of them: Cosmic Trigger 1, 2, and 3. We've only read the first one, and then a book called Prometheus Rising. I've read those two in the past 6 months or so. Um, and basically, he wrote it in a way that is kind of an attempt to get people to recognize synchronicities as a kind of a jumping off point for other things in their life. One of the things that he says in an early chapter is uh, take a walk, and before you go take a walk, say to yourself, I'm going to find a quarter. And
Mhm.
sometime on your walk, you're going to find a quarter around the road,
Okay.
um, which I did, you know, and I
And you
did
found a
find a
quarter?
quarter. Yeah,
Oh gosh.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, that day on a walk in the street. I did send a copy of that book to a friend of mine who's kind of figuring things out for himself. He's coming from one belief system into not having a belief system, and um, not to get too much into somebody else's story because it's not really my place. But whether or not having read, he did read it, and whether or not having read that will help him, I do not know. But hopefully, it'll give him something to think about. It
Absolutely.
certainly did me. I definitely recommend that book and also Prometheus Rising to anyone who's interested in this kind of stuff. Kind of, it gives you some background on some ways some other people have thought about that stuff,
Yeah. Mhm.
and things that have come from that. And this was written and published in a time that having a connection to Timothy Leary was not necessarily considered to be a good thing. That dude stayed in trouble with the law.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not as controversial now, decades removed. There's a lot of stuff he thought has been proven to be accurate
Right.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Um,
Really interesting.
but yeah, I would definitely recommend that one for sure.
Okay, I will definitely check it out. One other thing, probably a big one. Brittany, you had asked about my path and if there ever has been a time when I received signs or guidance that was pretty significant in my path. I had mentioned that my father had passed, it was a heart condition, and my brother then passed of the same heart condition. And I was a half marathon runner, so I didn't think that that was going to be something I would ever have to really worry about. So after my brother passed, though, due to family history, I did go in and get a full workup of my heart and came back. Nope, go ahead. I ran the Buffalo Marathon or half marathon. Like, you go ahead. Nope, you're good. And so fast forward 6 years later, um, I started I was still running and I had had this feeling out of nowhere that I wanted to go get an Apple Watch. It was kind of like a reward, and I had wanted one for a long time. My friend had one, and I just decided that particular day I finished. It was a Swigo. I think it was like an autism run or something. So I decided I was going to go into AT&T that day, and I purchased my Apple Watch and put it on. And by 7 o'clock that night, it was telling me I was in AFib. And I can't explain what had propelled me to really want to do that particular day.
Hmm.
But they fixed me up with a Holter monitor, and sure enough, the Apple Watch was right. And I do feel like that urge to get that
Hmm.
watch that day, combined with the beautiful technology of Apple, that saved my life because I
Yeah.
am 55. I mean, it could be likely that I was going to suffer from the same
Hmm.
affliction and end up because it was AFib. So,
Yep.
that's a bad that you don't mess with AFib. And
No.
since then I've had an ablation and I ran my first half marathon again. And there was a rainbow that day.
Aw.
So I
Yeah.
do feel like there's a lot of synchronicities. And Jonathan, I am going to check out that book.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You were being guided for sure. Whether you were consciously aware of it, it was just like, spirit
Well,
was
what
talking to you.
exactly and what floored me is I kept going to the doctor and asking them to check me out.
Hmm.
But it wasn't until that sign came to go get
Right.
that watch, and
Yep.
I'm positive that there was some serendipity to that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
And then you had the data to show,
exactly.
proof
I could
like,
say, hey,
look at this.
this is happening. Yeah.
Thank you, Apple.
Yes, I could be a spokes child.
Yeah.
You should give me some of their money.
Yeah.
I'll promote their product.
There you go. Oh,
Yeah.
good stuff.
I just want to let you guys know how much I love your podcast and all the wonderful things you're doing and giving all of us a chance to talk about things that typically we don't talk about. And,
Hmm.
it really does give everybody a place to share. And I'm sure that our stories prompt somebody else to be curious about the synchronicities in their life. And could that have been something that's not easily explained? Yeah.
Well, we definitely appreciate you coming on and, everybody that comes on. It For some people it's an act of courage, because a lot of these things are I think it's becoming more accepted and people are more open to spirituality and the paranormal, but for a long time it's been stigmatized that you're crazy, if you
Yeah,
think ghosts are real or aliens or, anything.
exactly. I
Yeah.
agree. But my gosh, we only use what percentage? Like a really teeny tiny
Hmm.
percentage of our brain. It makes sense that there's more to our ability to tap into psychic ability and
Yeah.
paranormal stuff. So I think that that's crazy not to believe that there's more.
Yep. Absolutely.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Very
Awesome.
appreciative.
Well, I appreciate being on, and I'll look forward to all the wonderful topics you guys are doing.
Yes, we hopefully have some more interesting ones to come. So we
Absolutely.
shall see.
All right. Well, I hope you guys have a great weekend.
Yeah, you as
We
well. Thanks
will,
for
you
talking to us. I
too.
do actually have one more
Oh, yeah.
book
Sorry.
suggestion for anybody dealing with synchronicity stuff. It's a real short one. I think I read it in like a couple of hours. But it's good. It's called Liminal by
Oh,
Cameron Whiteside. It's a fiction book, but it is fairly new, but pretty well known amongst people who have read it as a little bit of a synchronicity generator. Anyone interested in that might be also interested to check out that book. It's called Liminal.
okay. Awesome. I will look into that too.
Cool.
And I feel like
Awesome.
liminal is that I don't even know the meaning of that word. It sounds like luminal, which is a brain state. So I wonder liminal. I wonder what it means. We'll have
So
to,
it's kind of something that is liminal is it's in a state of being uh in between. It's
yeah.
transitional. It's
Okay.
you're in an intermediate state,
Okay. So that is what I thought it.
transient. Yeah.
Transient. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for the suggestion. I will definitely look into it.
Awesome.
Very cool. Well, guys, take care, and I will look
Mhm.
forward to catching up with you soon.
Okay.
For
All
sure.
right.
All right. Bye, Meg.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.